Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, life coach, business consultant, Kundalini yoga, meditation and breathwork teacher, certified conversational hypnotherapist, and top leader with doTERRA essential oils. Welcome to season 3 of the Living Fully Alive podcast. Now we're doing things a little differently this time. This season is an 8-part mini-series called Feel to Heal. And we will be taking a deep dive into all things feelings and emotions. How we respond to what we feel inside ourselves impacts our work, our relationships, our health, our spiritual lives, and everything in between. And when we don't have the skills to properly feel and process our emotions, our repressed anger, shame, resentment, fear, grief, and loneliness ends up driving the bus and hijacking our lives. But I want to show you a better way towards emotional resilience, freedom, and healing. Rest assured, I am still here to guide you on the path of inner transformation and empower you to come back into alignment with your soul, trust your inner voice, and design a life that makes your heart sing. So, let's jump into it. Hey y'all, it is Mary Hyatt, and welcome to another episode in our Feel to Heal 8-part series. I have absolutely loved getting the feedback from y'all through text messages and Instagram DMs. Thank you for everybody who, after I release the episode, reaches out and shares their aha moments, what they're gathering and learning from these episodes. I know that I've received a lot of messages about just over the past couple episodes that you all have needed to listen to them a couple times over and take notes and process. And I love that so much. I always find so much joy in getting to be a part of your journey as you increase your emotional awareness, as you start to process and give yourselves permission to really feel more. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that we can't ignore this conversation of trauma when we're looking at emotional processing. So most people don't think they have had trauma in their lives. Most people equate trauma with big T trauma, like an accident or rape or really horrific death or something that feels really acute. But in the reality is that most people have experienced a little T trauma or chronic trauma over time, whether that was in childhood, whether that has been just experiencing and living through life with regular death and heartache and heartbreak and pandemics and all the different things, that there is trauma somewhere in our life story. And so I wanted to bring on a guest expert today. Obviously, I've been doing these solo episodes and kind of giving you the foundation of emotional intelligence. But I wanted to bring in the conversation of trauma as it relates to emotional processing and how that relates to our body, how that relates to our nervous system. And I couldn't think of anybody better than Tracy Principi to have this conversation with. So Tracy is trained in somatic experiencing and somatic internal family systems, helping men and women navigate childhood wounds and addressing family of origin and generational trauma. Her own unresolved childhood trauma and the most shameful secret of having a narcissistic mother and no father led her to her own freedom by finally talking about the subject of not having a loving parent. This mother wound was at the core of her addictions, her overachieving tendencies, her failed relationships. And so once she addressed all of this, the floodgates opened and hundreds of people confided in her that they had suffered the same thing. The decades of guilt and shame, pretending things were fine, were finally processed. So you're about to hear, Tracy is so knowledgeable, so brilliant, so passionate about trauma-informed practices for anybody who is working with people, and is going to give you a lot of insight into how to somatically approach ourselves as we begin to experience our emotions more and in new ways. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Tracy. Hey, everybody. It is Mary. And as you just heard, I have the fabulous Tracy on with me. Hello. How are you?
Hi, so glad to be here.
Oh, I have really been waiting for this conversation. And I'm so glad that the series facilitated the opportunity for this to happen because I've sort of been thinking about, okay, how can I get Tracy to have a conversation with me on this podcast? And it didn't quite make sense until now. And I just am fascinated by your story, just your own personal journey. I think that
Mhm.
for any of us who are in a profession where we are helping people in some capacity, therapist, coach, practitioner, whatever, it usually corresponds to our own healing journey. And we end
Right.
up doing this work as our medicine because we've had to go through it ourselves. So I would love to start off
Yeah.
just by you sharing a little bit of your story and how you got into the
Mhm.
somatic trauma informed practice.
Yeah. Okay. It was a long, windy road to get here, let me tell you, but I'll
I
try
bet.
to sum this up. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, kind of, I came from a corporate background.
Okay.
Um, and I always felt like there was something missing, right? Or I would need to change jobs every couple of
Mm,
years, and it'd be okay for a while, and then there was this thing that set in, and I couldn't quite, I didn't understand why I was always feeling that way, right?
yeah.
So I'd change jobs or do something different, and that would seem to ease that thing for a period of time, and then it would come back.
Yeah.
And so I finally went into entrepreneurship, I think like 2005, with
Okay.
different businesses. But that same thing was still happening even when I was an entrepreneur.
Mm,
So I've actually had, like, I don't know, half a dozen different businesses. And it was always that same thing. Now, I was actually a business coach before I did this several years back. And that's when the burnout really hit. Like, I got
yes.
that to that point of, oh, okay, this is bad. This is like,
Yeah.
extreme burnout. But
Mm,
nobody was telling me that.
mm,
They were like, yeah, keep going, you got to keep pushing through, and just, you're gonna make it, and all this stuff, which I did.
yep.
Which I did all those things. And then, but the burnout was like literally had me on my back in
Mm,
bed, couldn't move. Like, am I dying? Am I going
yeah.
crazy? All of the
Yep.
above. I really didn't know what was happening. Somewhere in there, somebody said, read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, by Dr. Vessel van der Kolk. I said, okay, well, sure. We get to that point where we'll do anything, right?
Right.
And I read that book, and in that moment, for me, my experience was, wow, that's my entire life right there.
Wow.
And nobody ever told me that.
Wow.
Summed that up and I just, that light bulb moment, right? The
Hmm.
very next day, I had made an appointment with a somatic experiencing therapist. And at that point, again, when we get to that point where, wow, I'll do anything. I don't care what this, I don't even know what this is. I'm going to go check it out. Right.
Yeah.
Totally open. Had no idea. The first thing she asked me, she said, where do you feel that in your body? And
Mm,
I was the, again, this doesn't happen for everybody. The floodgates opened. I was like, wow, nobody ever asked me that before. Where do I feel
mm,
that in my body? Yeah. So I did that, because I wasn't sure. I was like, what is this? So I did that. My life transformed beyond even words can describe.
mm.
Um, and that's when I decided, you know what? I think other people probably don't know about this and
Right.
might need to know about it. And I decided to go down that journey of getting trained in somatic experiencing. I knew that at that time I was in my late 40s. I was like, I don't want to go back and get my master's and be a
Right.
therapist. And luckily I was able to train in somatic work.
Wow.
Yeah, without getting a master's degree.
Amazing. That's the way to go.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you slow down to explain, because I think that maybe obviously you and I know this term, but just the word
Yeah.
somatic, what does the word somatic mean? And what is somatic experiencing for those that may not know what that is? Oh, I think you may have just muted yourself. Or no, your volume just cut out. Hang on a second. Let me see. Say something for me.
Can you hear?
Yep. Okay, there we go. I don't know what happened.
Okay. Maybe I moved.
Go for it.
Yeah. So somatic is a Greek word, soma, for body, right? So literally, means body. And then somatic experiencing is a modality that Peter Levine is the founder of somatic experiencing. He came up with, he was actually studying animals and how animals behave in the wild, right? How they survive. And then he went on to be a therapist and said, oh, wait a minute, we're all humans, we're mammals, that our survival responses are inherent in our biology, and being a mammal and being human on the planet for whatever, millions of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty incredible.
It is a fascinating experience. And I love that even in your own story, when you walked in your first session, that question, well, where do you feel that in your body? And it is a profound question, even though it's so simple. I talk a lot about this on the podcast and have had a lot of people come on and talk about just that mind body connection. And for so many of us, it's challenging to access what's going on almost like below the surface, emotionally, physiologically. And so part of getting back into the body, as we've talked about on other episodes, is there's a lot of emotions that are stored inside of the body. Obviously, the nervous system is coming into play with all of that. So to just sort of set the foundation so we can have the conversation about this intersection between emotions and trauma, I would guess that a lot of people listening, outside of what we've just gone through with the pandemic, may or may not be able to identify or think they've experienced trauma in their lives. Can you explain sort of like a more basic definition of trauma so that people can self-identify and kind of go, oh yeah, that is me. This conversation is relevant, even though maybe they didn't think that when we started using that word trauma at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I think about trauma is it's not an event, it's an experience that overwhelms the nervous system and the capacity of a child, to deal with that experience, right? Maybe they don't have the cognitive words, they don't understand what's happening. There's a confusion, and the nervous system adapts to that environment. Now, most of us, we grew up in the same home during our, childhood. That experience happened more than once, right? So it maybe happened over and over and over again. And that's that developmental complex trauma. And most people, that's what I believe is most people have, and what most people aren't really thinking about as trauma, as, more of an event that happened. So I never thought, and I'll give you an example from my personal, I never thought I had trauma. I had no idea I had trauma. I knew there was things that weren't right, quite, something was off, but again, I never had words. I didn't have a memory. So, I didn't have a memory in my mind, an explicit memory. I did have an implicit memory, a body memory, but I didn't really, and I grew up in a really nice neighborhood in California, and, a cul-de-sac. I went to a really nice school, and, just thought I had some problems like everybody else, my age or whatever. Right. So, and that is most people's experiences
Yeah.
that they might not think is trauma, or, oh, well, that happened a long time ago. It's not a big deal. I got over it. I worked through it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I find that, working with my clients, if they haven't experienced something like a traumatic death, like something that was really unexpected, and now they're dealing with abandonment issues, or they were raped, or they had an alcoholic parent or an abusive parent, maybe they came with what they would consider like like you were talking about, a good upbringing, nice school, nice neighborhood, maybe even what they would consider as loving parents. And yet they're still experiencing a lot of different attachment issues, having a hard time being in relationships, maybe hypervigilant, having a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, just operating in their day-to-day life. The burnout, like you were talking about, kind of getting themselves to the place where they're totally overcommitted, overachieving, exhausted, just operating just at the very, very, very end of their thread. And so I think what's fascinating is when you start peeling back these layers, that's when you start making these connections, like, oh, it wasn't that event. And so they write it off. There wasn't that memory like you're talking about, but there were maybe subtle things chronically over time that contributed to this nervous system dysregulation. Which I would love for you to maybe go to that and talk a little bit about the nervous system and how important that is as we're talking about this. Like you were talking about the animals and Peter Levine and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody has a nervous system, and it has a lot of functions, that it's responsible for, right? So the anatomic nervous system is responsible for heart rate and breathing and blood flow and circulation and all these things that happen, without our conscious mind needing to, oh, I need to breathe, or I need to whatever, right? So these things happen automatically, and we just go on about our day. We don't really think about it. We don't even really pay attention to our body unless we have pain. That's, and that is the body signaling. So we have this wonderful nervous system that we've had for, since the beginning of our time here on the planet, that is responsible for our survival, and its job is to keep us safe. So if you think about, caveman days, and we literally had to stay in a community to survive, because being ousted from that community meant maybe there was, like, I don't know, a saber-toothed tiger that was going to get us, right? So obviously we don't have that in modern day society. And we have these higher brains that other mammals don't have, that we might have these traumatic experiences that get stored in our body, in our nervous system. So those experiences, I'm sure everybody might be familiar with, like, fight, flight, freeze, those responses. Usually the fight flight is like, yes, I want to do, to flee. And we need that system. For example, let's say there's, we're in the crosswalk, and we see a car coming at us, and they're not stopping. And in that split second, we get this adrenaline rush that somehow propels us across the street, and we just narrowly miss getting hit by the car, right? That's our survival system, and we need that. So that burst of adrenaline and cortisol that moves us out of the way, or we escape being injured, or something like that, right? So what happens with trauma is we're in a home that something is happening. Most people call it walking on eggshells. So there's this instability. And I hear that from almost everybody. It was like, even if they can't really describe it, they always say, wow, it was like walking on eggshells. Well, that's something that's happening in your body, in your nervous system. You're a child, so you can't run away, you can't flee, you can't fight back. And so the other option is to just kind of shut down, to stay safe, right? So your nervous system is this brilliant system that is trying to keep you safe in an environment that you can't escape from. Yeah.
I love that image of thinking about almost like the little child who is sensing and feeling all the energy that's happening inside of the family or their environment, but doesn't have the words to express how they're processing it. They don't have the tools to be able to move through it. And so I'm just having my own moment of, inner child work coming up and going, I can remember feeling all that anxiety in my physical body, but I would have never known how to communicate that to anybody or to say, Mom, I feel your stress, or Dad, I feel your panic about providing for our family. And so just being almost like a little sponge as a child, and the nervous system trying to manage all of that for us. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can imagine a child is taking on way more than they have the capacity for. In that environment over and over and over again. And something in the home, the parents, the caregivers were not regulated, right? They didn't have a regulated nervous system. They maybe didn't have, a handle on their emotional, internal, we can assume that they probably didn't have a lot of emotional awareness or self-awareness, whether they had an addiction problem, a mental illness, undiagnosed, diagnosed, or whatever. Maybe they were just working all the time. And when they came home, they just flopped in a chair and didn't really, participate. Right. So things like that. And maybe you were a child and you had to manage your parents' emotions. You had to manage what was happening in the home, again, to keep yourself safe, maybe your siblings safe. Maybe you had to be the parent, right? All of those scenarios. And that's, again, where the people pleasing, perfectionism, achieving, if you only got love, if you were achieving, then you're going to stay safe by achieving. Yeah.
I'm just having a moment of being like, yep, I can relate to all that.
If you had to please your parents and that was the only way to survive and maybe not get in trouble, then that people pleasing is going to be, those tendencies are going to be really strong. So all of that gets stuck in our nervous system, and then we go into adulthood. And this too, again, is why people don't recognize trauma, because a lot of people will say, oh, that's just my personality. I'm this like really giving person. Right. And, that's just my personality. I like to give and make everybody happy. But there's always that flip side where, okay, you're doing all that, but at what cost? There's always a cost. And then we'll say, well, yeah, I feel really taken advantage of, or I feel like I'm a doormat, and I feel really resentful about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and there's always a risk for not doing it, I think, too. It's like the risk of, if they stop people pleasing or stop achieving or whatever that coping mechanism is, they risk abandonment, rejection, all of that, right? I mean, talk about being cast out of the community and then being susceptible to whatever that saber-toothed tiger is in our lives. It's real to
it's real.
The unconscious mind. It's a real threat, right? I mean, there's an actual risk there. And I think this is the gift of somatic work. This is the gift of emotional intelligence, is to slow some of that down from being just stuck in that hyper survival state where you're not connecting the dots, to going, let me bring this pause here for a moment in between my knee-jerk reaction to people please or overcommit or be codependent or whatever, to let's put this moment where we can gain some awareness and choose a different type of response. But I know that one of the things that you talk about a lot is how in pop culture, or I should say like pop self-help world, there's this concept of, in order to gain greater emotional intelligence or awareness, we need to sit with our feelings. And if we could just sit and feel what we're feeling, then we'll be able to move through them and process them.
Yeah.
And I want you to talk about that, how that's maybe not the most effective way to do this work, and how trauma and the nervous system play into that concept of just sit with your feelings and then you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good one. And yeah, because it'd be nice if we could just sit with our feelings and feel our feelings. A couple of things is humans want to stay away from pain. That's why we push down. That is our natural instinct is to move away, as far away from pain as possible. So that's why we, hide trauma, minimize it, deny it, push it away, put it in a little box and forget about it. Right. Yeah. So moving towards that pain is like, oh no, that is not a good feeling. So, and again, because our body was not a safe place to be, we moved into our head and cognitive, and most people are not going to have that somatic awareness of the body, except when we're in pain and the body's screaming at us of, yes, I can feel my pain and recognize, my back hurts really bad. But in terms of actually feeling emotions, most people that come to me, they are very far removed from their emotions. So that's why people can talk about trauma, really, heavy duty traumas. They can talk about it with no emotional reaction a lot of times, because it's not because they got over it. It's because they are very far emotionally removed from that trauma, right? Yeah. So that is why feeling in your body is number one. Most people can't feel what they're feeling. They can't even name the emotions. And in somatic work, we don't start there. We start with, maybe you feel some pain, you can feel that. And we actually start there because most people could start there. But if you can identify where you feel sad, angry, that's very repressed. So even if you're crying, that's not necessarily processing through your body, right? And again, in somatic work, we don't flood the system, because the nervous system will slam on the brakes. It will shut you down, and you will dissociate or do whatever your coping mechanism is. And there's no bad coping mechanisms. Again, they're all there as a protection mechanism.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, I just want to pause you, because to give a tangible example of this, because I think for most people, they've experienced this flooding and then their nervous system kicks on that brake. And I know that for a lot of people, maybe they're having an experience of vulnerability in their sharing, or even I think about the tolerance somebody might have to receive care or to receive love, right? And they go, oh, that feels real nice. And then the walls go up. It's like, nope, you can't come in. And they might sabotage by picking a fight or running away, right? It's like, there's not, even on the flip side of anger or sadness, even some of those emotions like love or feeling calm or feeling at peace, there can be an inability to feel safe in those emotions as well. And so I think,
absolutely,
anytime that we start feeling something and then the walls go up, it's just another analogy we can use. To me, that's going, oh, something about this doesn't feel safe. I'm moving too fast and I got to get back to that zone of safety almost.
Yeah. And most people don't. Safety is a felt sense in the body. And if you've never experienced that, you don't actually have that feeling. So everything can feel unsafe. And then things that are this is where safety looks like that, whatever it is that you do, the people pleasing became the safety, the high performance became the safety, the avoiding all the things. So your nervous system got like rewired with the, the red and black instead of the whatever, right? It got miswired. And so when we go to regulate and find safety, the nervous system can actually see that as, wait a minute, this is the hardest thing. When people actually go to slow down, because in order to feel, you have to slow down. And that is like the hardest thing for people to do. It sounds simple. Slowing down, that it gets very uncomfortable. Yeah, because that's when the nervous system is like, whoa, that isn't safe. This other thing was safe. Chaos was safe, right? Yeah.
That's a fascinating concept to think about, that chaos, drama, just instability, all of that ends up feeling oftentimes for people, or a state of hypervigilance, anxiety, feels safer to people than calm, regulated, stable, secure. Like that can feel at the beginning a lot more threatening than some of this more familiar chaos. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And so thinking back in hindsight, if I look at my life and terrible relationships in my 20s and just all the things, it made sense because I was just doing what was familiar. Yeah. And the unfamiliar was just too scary to take that risk, to do that. Yeah. And so that's where people usually, the patterns, that instability in childhood, obviously it shows up in intimate partnerships. I see it with people in whatever they do for a job or work, or if they're an entrepreneur, have a regular job, it shows up there in friendships, just every nook and cranny of your life.
Yeah. Yes.
It's there, right?
It really is. It permeates every aspect of life. And, it's funny because I personally am working through what to call myself as a coach. And so for the longest time, I've said, okay, well, I'm a mindset coach. And that doesn't even begin to touch the work that I do with the subconscious. And I know that when we're operating in our frontal cortex and the upper part of our brain, it can never address or access this kind of stuff. And so I remember early on with my clients finding out that, okay, just saying your affirmations, just thinking positively, just talking about your problems actually isn't going to address all of the nervous system, the trauma, any of it. Like it doesn't access that part of the brain where all of that lives. And I was finding as a coach at the beginning, how frustrating that was, thinking, well, gosh, just change your thoughts. It will change your life. Like I was a big Tony Robbins follower. But I could see that in the results of my clients, they were still operating in, overachieving. Like a lot of people that come to me are overachievers, stuck in burnout. A lot of people have high levels of anxiety, difficulty meditating, difficulty doing any of that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't until I started to make the connection, wait a second, this going through the mind is not going to address what's in the body. It's not going to address this trauma. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. Because I think that for people that have done some of this self-development, self-help work, and they're frustrated, can you talk about why that is, that it's not really connecting internally? Hey there, real quick. If you are at all feeling extra overwhelmed or exhausted by social media, or simply don't have energy to read through any more emails, believe me, I get it. That's why I want to invite you to connect with me over text. I send out weekly affirmations, words of encouragement, meditations, and of course, you'll be the first to know about any upcoming events or when I publish a new podcast episode. Plus, it's really me, so it's super easy. Just text 615-930-3522 or go to maryhyatt.com/text. maryhyatt.com/text. All right, back to our podcast episode.
Yeah. And that was me too. I did all the personal development. I was the business coach that told you to do affirmations and think positive and all the things.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I remember those moments when it really wasn't working for me. And I felt actually more exhausted by, because people's answers tended to be, oh, well, you're just not doing enough. You just need to keep doing it and do more. And at some point that just didn't feel like that was the right thing to do anymore.
Yeah.
It was like this intuition, but I was still trying to be the people pleaser and do all the right things. Yep. And then finally I was just, again, my body gave out. So yeah, so that's where it's like those cognitive approaches, like you said, they're not getting to that part of the brain where trauma is stored. And the amygdala, your lizard brain, your survival brain, that survival is always going to override, that is going to, override any mind cognitive stuff. That's why a lot of people can go to therapy for 10, 20 years. And most of my clients that come to me, they have done that too, but they still have the anxiety, they still have the depression, they still have the, maybe even panic attacks or, whatever might be going on, the burnout, because again, it's not getting to that nervous system level to restore that, if you want to talk about the window of tolerance, being in that regulated state, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just gonna go there, was talking about this concept of the window of tolerance and kind of bringing it back to this concept of emotional flooding. When you sit down and it all comes out, and it's, I remember thinking, if I feel what's inside, I will go crazy and they will lock me up and put me in a straitjacket. Like I was sure that I would end up in the loony bin. Like it felt that scary, And so I would push that down. And so I didn't understand this concept of, oh, you can go slow. Oh, you can baby step it. I didn't have that tool yet.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that for somebody that might be a little bit nervous to put their toes into the water of starting to feel and experience their emotions? What's the best way to get started gently with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question because, again, most people are like, wow, if I slow down, I'm not going to be able to I'm going to just bottom out, right? And it's that, and I'm just going to be like so depressed and suicidal, I won't ever be able to function again. And that is valid, that's real. And that's why in somatic work, we do it really slow. And really something we call titration, we make it manageable. And the thing that I don't even work with trauma, at least for months, right? We're just working with the body and the nervous system. We are not diving into any trauma history, and we don't really need to. And again, it can be very re-traumatizing if you're already like at your maximum capacity. You have no room for anything else. You're maxed out, burnt out. There's no room to talk about trauma. And we wouldn't want to do that because that can really, bring up even more dysregulation. So just working with, most people are presenting with, I'm depressed, I have anxiety, I feel burned out. We work with that because that's a body that, that's letting me know exactly what's going on with the nervous system. And we start there. We're not even dealing with trauma. And again, there might not even be a memory to deal with,
right?
A memory in your mind. Yeah. So
I love that.
Yeah. And that is what a lot of even therapists and coaches or healers make the mistake of thinking that they need to find the root cause and, what happened when you were 5?
Right.
That's actually really a mistake because that can be very re-traumatizing. And I experienced that with, myself again, before I knew I had a trauma. Somebody was like, oh, hey, can you tell me when you were 7 and what, and I remember having this experience, and now I know that I was being re-traumatized, right? Somebody was trying to dig around for a memory. So we don't do that. at all. Yeah. And I remember recently I went to a therapist and she said, well, give me your entire trauma history from the time you were 5 to whatever.
Wow.
And like I could feel in my butt, my heart started pounding. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So the beautiful thing that comes with that is like the self advocating, the self trust. I felt that in my body. My heart started beating faster. I kind of tensed up and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. Right.
Yeah.
So I was able to do that. Where in the past, I probably would have, given her all my trauma history.
Yeah, sure. Well, and it's challenging, when you have an expert who you sort of in some way sort of give your power over to, well, they know more than me.
Right.
And
That's
and we disconnect from the wisdom of our bodies and that intuition. And I think this is why I love somatic work. I'm just so drawn to it. Not only has it changed my life, but I can just see the impact of it because it's so gentle. Like, it's like, almost like you're gentle. Like, can we get into it a little bit more? But it's so
it's very gentle,
sweet to me that there is a way to ease into this that doesn't create that, oh my gosh, let me put the brakes on. But it's almost like earning trust, little step by little step by little step. And it is very slow, which is exactly what the nervous system needs. And I love that this is the work that you do. And I'm just imagining, for somebody who has a lot of anxiety right now or fear right now, is there anything that that you could share with us as far as a practice that somebody could do at home to find a little bit more grounding or centering or regulation that they could do even right after listening to this podcast?
Yeah. So a really simple thing to do is just, I invite you and listeners to just notice your feet on the floor right now. Just, feeling the floor underneath you, supporting you. I have bare feet and I'm on a carpet, so I feel that carpet under my feet. And then just noticing, your butt in the chair, whatever you're sitting on, just notice how that supports you. If there's a cushion at all, or if it's hard or, cold, just noticing that and just feeling that support. And then you might look around your room and just notice something that feels a little more pleasing. It could be a color, an object. I have a plant that has like really, almost like 3D leaves that really stand out. It's in a blue planter. So when I look at that plant, and I just notice, maybe I'll put my hand on my chest for a little more support. And I just notice, it just drops a little, right? So I like my plant. It's really calming. Maybe you have a pet or, a little soft pillow you can get or a blanket to offer yourself some more support. Hand on your chest and just noticing, can I take a deeper breath? You might not be able to, but if you can, a long exhale is going to be a calming, just exhaling out, almost like a sigh. You could even sigh. It's like, And then another technique I'll share with you that could be helpful. And a lot of things we do in somatic work, the great thing about it is there's no right or wrong. I mean, there's no like, you got a mindset for 3 hours and there's none of that. It's actually, because I don't know what you're feeling. So it's really about choice and self, advocacy, again, things that were taken away from us if we had trauma. And a lot of, again, personal development is all about, you must do this. Right. This is actually you figuring out what works for you, because I can't tell you that. You need to feel it. And I don't know what it feels like to live in your body. So another thing, some people are like, well, I don't like that. Oh, great. That's great information for me. Thank you for telling me that. Because now I know that your nervous system didn't respond to that. Somebody else is like, oh, I loved that. Great. That tells me what your nervous system is responding to and not responding to, right? So Another thing we call dual awareness is just, I'm feeling really anxious right now. So naming it and noticing, yeah, I feel really anxious right now. Or I use the word activated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm feeling really activated right now. And I know that I'm probably safe because I'm in my home in a room.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So naming that what's going on, but again, most likely we are not, there's not a threat anymore.
Right.
It's just that past thing showing up in the present. So if I'm in my home, in my room, and there's nothing dangerous happening here.
Mm.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so helpful. And
So
it makes me,
trying that out.
yeah, it makes me think of, are you familiar with Tara Brach? Do you know who that is?
Yeah.
One of the things that she does a lot of mindfulness work, obviously, but one of her sayings is, it feels real, but it's not true. And
Yeah.
I love that, of kind of bringing yourself back to the truth. Like you were saying, what I picked up from your technique was, notice what's around you that's real, that's true, that is, and connect to that through your senses. What do you smell?
Right.
Feel the carpet under your toes. Notice what you're looking
That's
at,
right.
the plant or the fabric or whatever, feeling your body,
Yeah.
touching your heart, the five senses, and how that takes us out of that looping that's going on mentally and brings us back into, okay, that feels real. That looping feels real, but it's not true. There's not an actual threat in this space, in my environment. And I so appreciate you sharing those simple tools, because it is just in that moment of taking that longer breath, reminding ourselves that, okay, tangibly, I can see and touch, I'm here and around me. It's like, if you've ever experienced a panic attack, that's super helpful. It's like noticing the floor, noticing your clothes on your body. Like, okay, I'm actually okay. I'm right here. I love that. And just to kind of conclude, because I feel like we've talked about so many things, and this is just obviously the tip of the iceberg of what we could get into. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure to mention or to share, that some question I didn't ask you? I want to give you an opportunity to fill in a gap if I missed one.
Well, I do want to add, something to those practices.
Yeah.
When we build nervous system capacity, it's much easier to do in a reasonably calm state than, let's say you're so activated, you're having a full-blown panic attack, or you're just in that response where your prefrontal cortex has shut down offline. It can be hard to try to calm yourself down, right? So, just that's normal when we're talking about nervous system response. So a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I feel really defeated because I tried to do this thing, it didn't work. And, and that's okay. That's totally normal. Yeah. It's actually easier to do these exercises when you feel, reasonably calm.
It's really helpful.
Then at that state where you have fled the scene, you are shut, it's going to be hard. So yes, so just knowing that is a normal thing, right? So really, I'm big into normalizing all these things. Especially for us that have been former I got to get it perfect, and it didn't work, and
Yes, 100%. Thank you for that permission.
So it's normalized. It's all normal. And again, all of this is like really new to most people. So
it is. And there's the invitation to be so gentle in this, where it's a progress. It's a process. There is, for me, I feel like I've been on this journey now for probably 6 or 7 years. And I'm still learning how to regulate, especially, you throw in normal life and then you throw in a pandemic and all the things that happen on top of that. And it's like, man, I was great. And then, I feel like I'm starting all over again. And so I think that there's a lot of grace to be had in this, which is encouraging to me as a recovering perfectionist and overachiever. It's like, there's no way of doing this perfectly. It's messy. It's just, it's not sexy. I always say this kind of work is not sexy. It's not the kind of thing that you can put online and say, here's what you're going to get when you do this and just follow these 10 steps. Like it's in some ways hard to communicate because it is so personal for each person. But I appreciate your wisdom, your voice, and I'm really grateful for your journey that it brought you here and that you're able to share with so many people the gift that you received and now paying that forward. And I am sure that there are people listening who would love to continue to follow you and work with you. So where is the best place that people can find you and ask about your services and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, I'd love to share. My website is tracyprincipi.com. Instagram is @tracyprincipi. I'm pretty active on there, and I actually answer people that DM me, so that's open over there. And then email is tracy@tracyprincipi.com. I love questions that people have about this work. I actually really love answering questions and educating, or if someone is going through something and they'd like to message me, feel free to do that or check out my website.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, one of the things I don't think I have mentioned to you yet is that I've been doing a lot of work on trauma this year specifically. And as I've been doing all the somatic stuff, I was like, oh, okay, I want to see like who is the leading expert in this space and put it on my Facebook page. And I mean, it was a vast majority of people said your name. And that's how I found you. And I was like, this is so amazing.
And that's amazing.
And my experience of you, obviously, you don't know me until this conversation, but my experience of just watching you online, you are so generous and you are so responsive to people's comments, and what you provide as education is so generous. So I encourage anyone, do go follow Tracy, message her. She has a wealth of information. And I know you do a lot of webinars and masterclasses and things as well, which is incredible. So I'm sure I'll link to your website. People can go there and find out more, but thank you. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Y'all, I hope that you tune in for our next episode in our Feel to Heal 8-part mini-series. There are many more conversations to have, but until then, sending you all so much loving and so much light. Bye. Hey there. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it to your Instagram stories and tag me @MaryG Hyatt. Or, of course, share it with a dear friend, sister, or colleague. I think we could all use a little more emotional awareness, don't you think? Plus, if you haven't already subscribed to the Living Fully Alive podcast, make sure to do that now so you don't miss out on any of my episodes or guided meditations. All right. Thanks, y'all, and see you next time.